we've been taking a different passage every week that has been commonly twisted and manipulated to fit people's different theologies and beliefs and desires. And today we're going to be taking 1 Timothy 6, verse 10 on the screen. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Now, how that verse gets twisted is they leave out one part of that verse, which says, the love of. They say, money is the root of all evil. Well, in fact, it's the love of money that is. Now, so I want to begin with a little question, and I want you to think about this question, honestly. Would having just a little more money, okay, just a little bit, I'm not talking about that big lottery winner down in Chino Hills. No, I'm talking about just a little bit more money. Would it make your life a little easier? Would it? Yeah, of course. Yeah, right. If I had a checkbook big enough, I could write you some checks. What would it be? What would make life just a little bit more comfortable? Now, Ecclesiastes 5:10, King Solomon gives a definition of loving money. He says, whoever loves money never has enough. Never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. Now, I asked the question of would it make your life easier? Yes, of course it would make your life easier. That doesn't mean that you're going to be pursuing it just because you think it would make your life easier. I kind of look at this thing, how much do we actually need to be happy, satisfied, and secure? Most people would probably say just a little bit more. Maybe $500 more a month? Would that be a good number? Would that make you feel a little bit better? Maybe $1,000 a month? Just a little bit more? Whoever loves money never has enough. Now, let's look at the context for this verse that we've just read. It was written by Paul to his disciples Timothy and Titus. He loved these young guys. He was pouring himself into them. So this is really personal, this whole thing. Now, in 1 Timothy 6:6, if you have a Bible open, it says, Paul says this, but godliness with contentment is great gain. And that's pretty much his theme throughout the whole letter. It wasn't money, it was godliness. What would make these brothers of his, these disciples of his, more godly? Then he says, for we brought nothing into the world, so what can we take out? He says, we can take nothing out. Now, I've got to tell you, I've never seen a U-Haul being pulled behind a hearse, and I see a lot of hearses from my viewpoint in my office. You can't take it with you. Kind of reminds me of the old guy who packed all his money into a suitcase, and he put it up in the attic. And his wife said, why are you putting it up in the attic? Because he says, well, when I die, then as I'm going up to heaven, I can grab the suitcase and I can take it with me. Well, he died, and his wife went up into the attic, and there was the suitcase. And she thought, oh, that old fool. Why didn't he put it in the basement? Then he could have grabbed it as he was headed out. We brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of this world. Then in verse 8 he says, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Now, do you believe that? No, not really. Because once you get the food And once you get the clothing, then there's the other stuff you want to get. You know, if we have food and clothing, that would be enough. And then an iPhone, that would be nice. And then Netflix, that would be really cool too. And a bigger flat screen TV, that would be really nice, okay? Because then, you know, I could watch sermons on it, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah. One of the things Paul is essentially trying to teach us is that the richest aren't those with the most, but those who need the least. So if we could readjust ourselves to needing the least, we could be very content. You know, when you go on a mission field and you go into a place, I've been to Honduras, of course, a number of times to Mexico, but when you go there, they're living on dirt floors, and they have very little, and they have no running water, and what toilets they have don't work, kind of thing. And yet you can hear at night the praising of the Lord, the hymn singing that goes on at night is amazing. The richest aren't those who have the most, the richest are those who need the least. Now here's the problem. Discontentment can make a rich person poor, and contentment can make a poor person rich. Paul's saying we brought nothing into the world and we're going to take nothing out of this thing. So if we have food and clothing and shelter, the basic needs, we can be content with that, because godliness with contentment is great gain. And that's his whole purpose of writing this. Then he goes on to say in verse 9, those who want to get rich fall into a temptation and a trap, and then into harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Then we get to verse 10, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Maybe you know somebody like that. They chased it, and as a result, they walked away from God. Or this one is so common in families. Loved one dies, and what do they have to settle? The will. And so families get into all kinds of squabbles over the will, and people won't talk to one another. Family members, blood, won't talk to each other because of the will. Jesus said, you cannot serve both God and money. Now, it's interesting that he didn't say you can't serve both God and power, or both God and popularity, or both God and sex, or whatever. He said you cannot serve God and money. Because for many people, money is going to be the number one competitor for their heart. It's that thing that we go after so much. It'll be the very thing that distracts us from having the true riches that God has for us, wants to give us. Now, there are two extremes in the church. The first extreme is called the prosperity gospel. I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. And when it comes to the prosperity gospel, it's the belief that if I'm godly, I'm going to have a lot of money. And there are preachers who are preaching that message boldly. And proof of that, they will say, is go out to the parking lot and see my new Rolls Royce. Okay? If you believe enough, God will provide for you. And they'll say, because I started in poverty and now look at that Rolls Royce out there. Or go out to the airport and see my private jet. God has provided that. And so this message is dangerous and abusive, and it's a misunderstanding of the blessings of God. But they believe this very, very firmly, that if you believe, God is going to put that money in your pocket. And the reason you don't have that in your pocket is why? Because you don't believe. Oh, so what kind of car are you driving? Shows what kind of faith you have. I don't believe the prosperity gospel. I believe that it's a distortion of the truth. But then there's the poverty gospel. Oh, I love the poverty gospel. I've met a few people that are into the poverty gospel. That is, if you have anything, that is a sign that you are materialistic and you need to give that away. So my wife and I served as missionaries to City Team Ministries in San Jose, working amongst the poor. And I remember we would have to raise our own support as missionaries. And the belief is that a missionary has to live poor. So we were so conscious of anything that we purchased that people would look at that and say, aha, they're getting rich off of donations. That's what it is. It's called the poverty gospel. And if you're really spiritual, really spiritual, you won't have anything. But in fact, if you look at how the scripture speaks to the subject, I got a verse here, Deuteronomy 8:18. Remember the Lord your God, for he is the one who gives you the ability to produce wealth. God would not give us the ability to do something like that if it was wrong. You know, if you have wealth, there's a lot that you can do to help people with it. And so we need to be careful not to go off on this. If I'm godly, I'm going to be blessed. Or if I'm godly, I'm going to be poor. No. It's a misunderstanding of God's word. Now, in verse 17, Paul says, back to Timothy, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Now, who's he speaking to there? The rich, right? Fortunately, he's not speaking to Irvington Presbyterian Church, right? Because we're not rich, right? I don't see a Rolls Royce out there. The door is open today, so we're not rich, right? No, not at all. And yet, the average person in this room today, and those listening on video, have about a couple $100 worth of technology in their pocket or their purse. You know how much that would be? That's a year's worth of wages for not half of our planet. Most of you have access to some sort of transportation. If you own your own vehicle, according to an article I read recently, that puts you in the top 9 or 10% of the wealthiest people in the world today. You're at least in the top 10% of the richest people if you own a vehicle. Even if it's as old and ratty as my old 01 Honda was. Wow. The funny thing is, we'll take that same top 10 car and we'll drive it past 7 or 8 restaurants looking for just the perfect restaurant to go eat at. And then we'll go in there and we'll go through the menu and we just can't decide what we're going to order. And then finally we put our order in and it takes 11 minutes for the food to come and we complain because it took so long, even though we took so long picking that food out. Rich. The rich. You know, and then the funny thing is, we take that same car and we drive it back to its own house. So we're used to, what do we call the house that the car lives in? Garage. Garage sounds second tier. But the garage in most of the world, that is unheard of. The car has its own house. Wow. You have a working bathroom with water flowing that makes the room smell so much better than those other parts of the world. We used to build houses in Tijuana, and we would build outhouses for the more wealthy of the poor. And one year, a family decided that they wanted the outhouse attached to their house. That was a really bad idea, and for obvious reasons, because there was no running water. So do not take that running water in your house for granted. It is so important. And then we probably watch a flat screen TV, and we probably stream movies on it, and all that stuff. And some of you will walk into a closet. I've seen some of the newer houses, not around here, but some of the newer houses where the closets are the size of our 1948 master bedroom. It's amazing. The only thing missing is they don't have a faucet in there and a microwave. We're rich. We're blessed. But we don't need to apologize for it. You know, we didn't deserve this. We got born into this. And you could have been born somewhere else. That, you know, God gave you what you have. And you used it. You worked hard to maintain what you have. And God provided that. No, discontentment makes rich people poor. And contentment makes anybody rich. So let's read that verse again, as if God is speaking to us. Command those who are rich in this present world. And who's that? Us, okay? Even our students. Not quite as rich yet, but you will be one day. Rich in this present world. Command us not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put our hope where? In God. To put our hope in God. Not in wealth, but in God. Not in money, but in God. Not in things, but in God. Not in this world, but in eternity. Put their hope not in wealth, but in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them not to put their hope in wealth, but to put their hope in God. Why, when I ask you if a little more money would make your life a little easier or better, most of us would say, of course. Because money promises what only God can provide. So 3 things that money promises us. Money promises us if we have enough, we'll be happy. But how much do you need to be happy? More. Just a little more. Just a little more. Number 2, money promises if you have enough, you'll have security. You know, if I finally get that car paid off, I'm going to feel a little better. Need a little more. That credit card paid off. Just a little more. Just a little more. A bit more. And the third thing money promises, if you have enough, you'll have significance. You'll look important. You know, like driving up to a party in your old car that coughs. You turn it off and it jumps and it coughs and it smells and it's got Bondo and a broken window and all that stuff. Doesn't look cool. You're at your high school reunion. It just doesn't look like you're very significant in life, does it? Money promises you that if you have it, you will be significant. But we're deceived. We're under the power and influence of money. And money can never meet our deepest needs. Jesus will meet our deepest needs. Jesus will accomplish what we need here. Wow. So, only Jesus will. And the crazy thing is, more money can't do it, but more Jesus will. So, when you have more Jesus, then you can be content with what you have. So when you feel that urge for more money, more things, seek after more of who? Jesus and what he would want. Because you got to realize we're never, ever going to have enough. But what we really need more of is his grace, more of his peace, more of his assurance, more of his presence, more of his power in our life, and that's available for us right now. So practice that this week, because you're going to get bombarded all week long with, you need this. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have this? Blah, 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 blah. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have more of Jesus? Wow, it would be good. Now let me tell you about next week, next Sunday. This past week, God put a message on my heart. He said, in the midst of a very, very dark period of history right now, God has said to me, we can be optimistic. And He showed me, in an amazingly short amount of time, 8 reasons why we can be optimistic just from the book of Romans. And the bulletin insert next week will be one of those that you can place on your refrigerator or on your mirror or whatnot to remind you of these 8 things are reasons why we can be optimistic. And God has told me that is what we've got to be. We've got to be the light in the darkness. We've got to be optimistic because what God has shown us. So that's next Sunday, and I hope that you'll be here. And if you're not here, check it out online. It'll be there as well as the insert.